Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and to our listeners. This press conference has been called not to go over what FATF's review of October 23rd, 2015 states on Guyana, but to address the consequences and actions to be taken by the APNU-AFC government to bring Guyana into compliance. And just for people who may not have access to the internet, it's important to note that on the FATF website, Improving Global AML CFT Compliance Ongoing Process, October 23, 2015, the document states that FATF and the FATF-style regional bodies will continue to work with the jurisdictions noted below and to report on the progress made in addressing the identified deficiencies. The FATF calls on these jurisdictions to complete the implementation of action plans expeditiously and within the proposed timelines. The FATF will closely monitor the implementation of these action plans and encourages its members to consider the information presented below. And the countries are listed in case anyone doesn't believe us: Afghanistan, Algeria, Angola, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Iraq, Guyana, Panama, Papua New Guinea, Syria, Uganda, and Yemen. And of course, so when we go to Guyana, it then points out that in October 2014, Guyana made a high-level political commitment to work with the FATF and CFATF to address its strategic AML CFT deficiencies. Since June 2015, Guyana has taken steps towards improving its AML CFT regime, including by enacting the AML CFT Amendment Act 2015. However, the FATF has determined that certain strategic deficiencies remain. Guyana should continue to implement its action plan, including by 1. Ensuring and implementing an adequate legal framework for identifying, tracing, and freezing terrorist assets. 2. Ensuring a fully operational and effectively functioning FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit. 3. Establishing effective measures for customer due diligence and enhancing financial transparency. And 4. Implementing an adequate supervisory framework for Guyana. Now, therefore, when one reads it and then recognizes that 2 countries alone are no longer under the FATF review, Ecuador and Sudan, and Sudan is really mind-boggling. It's a country that has been at war, and if Sudan can make it and comply with FATF and be removed, then what happened to Guyana? The silence of the government, and the focal point for the government in particular, Attorney General and Minister Basil Williams, 5 days after the website has posted the official report of FATF, and certainly 5 days since he's returned to Guyana, is deafening and certainly instructive. Maybe the government, and more so the AG, is embarrassed to now inform the Guyanese people that Guyana is still not compliant with the FATF recommendations. But it is time that the Attorney General and Minister has to come to the public and declare that we are still on the grey list, we are still not compliant, and he has to also say, what is he going to do about it? What is the government going to do about it? The first issue, therefore, is full public disclosure. The issue, thus, of public disclosure is of deep concern. Why the silence? For the PPP, this habit or practice of the government and its spokespersons appear to be now a constant and consistent feature of this government, of non-disclosure, of springing surprises on people, or just being silent on key national issues. The AG, as the Guyana focal point, must come to the public and explain and inform the people on what transpired and what measures and steps will be taken to bring Guyana into compliance and taken off the list of what is called high-risk and non-cooperative jurisdictions, known popularly as the grey list. How did the government come to such a wrong conclusion that Guyana was now in compliance with the passage of the amendment bill, as did the U.S. Charge d'Affaires in June this year? More especially after these statements, Guyana and the banking system was still under the same restrictions and measures imposed by FATF by placing Guyana on the list of high-risk and non-cooperative jurisdictions. So despite the statements they made in June, July that Guyana was compliant now that the act had passed, the banking system was aware and all the persons dealing with foreign transactions were aware that no such thing had happened, as we were still under the restrictions and flagged internationally in terms of foreign transactions to do with money laundering and terrorist financing. So the first issue for me is public disclosure. Why is the minister, and in particular who's the focal point, Mr. Basil Williams, and the government absolutely silent on this issue, what happened at the FATF meeting? The second issue is lack of follow-up action. One will recall that the government rushed through the MLCFT amendment bill on June 25th and 26th, 2015 in 2 days, a day apart, and therefore had to suspend the standing orders to allow for that, and enacted it by the signature of His Excellency Mr. Granger and published in the Official Gazette on July the 10th, 2015. Furthermore, regulations were gazetted on August the 11th, 2015. However, one should note that Guyana had to implement both legislative and non-legislative measures to bring it into compliance through the agreed-upon action plan approved by the International Review Body and FATF in October 2014, with timelines of what had to be implemented by May 2015 and September 2015. The then government, the PVP administration, in October 2013 had set up the National Advisory Committee, made up of relevant heads of agencies and ministers, similar to what is listed in the 2015 AML-CFT Act, as comprising part of the authority, and that is the ex officio officers that are named, to address both sets of measures, as stated in the multilateral evaluation mechanism, and later, post-June 2014, with the outstanding recommendations, including legislative measures that were stuck and held at ransom in the Parliamentary Select Committee on AML-CFT. This committee also had to deal with the additional non-legislative measures, including training of the personnel in the SOCU, the Serious Organized Crime Unit, which was set up in this period, the FIU, coordination between agencies such as GRA, Customs, SOCU, and KANU, and FIU, and therefore protocols were developed, etc. Since elections, this body has not met. Since the enactment of the Amendment Act in July 2015 and the regulations in August 2015, there is no indication the government has taken any action to implement the provisions of the AML-CFT Amendment Act 2015. Some of these were their own quote-unquote innovations, or fresh start, as they like to say. Nor is there any indication as to what non-legislative measures have been instituted. It seems as if the government, having been satisfied that it enacted the AML-CFT Amendment Act 2015, sat back and did nothing. Having worked with the now members of the government in the PSC's Parliamentary Select Committee on the AML-CFT bill, I am personally not surprised, as their attitude was one that heeded no advice from the then government side, who were all members of the National Advisory Committee, and the FAU, who were the experts on the FATF recommendations and advised on action needed to be taken. Not only were they dismissive of the government and the FIU at the time, they were also dismissive of the CFT assessor and CFT and FATF. Having enacted the bill, the government did not set up the AML-CFT authority in accordance with their act and convened the Parliamentary Committee on Appointments. As you will recall, the new act requires that 10 members of the AML-CFT authority comes from a process of Parliament, publicizing process of selection and appointing by a majority on the House, coming from the based on the recommendations of the Parliamentary Committee on Appointments. That body is now chaired by Dr. George Norton. And this is also the same body that deals with the rights commissions, ERC, etc. So that this latter was appointed in September. So why has there been no haste on meeting this recommendation, number 4, which is listed now again in the FATF report? Certain things could not be done because the original bill was stuck in the Parliament, in the 10th Parliament. Now they went ahead and moved it through by a majority, why haven't they taken the necessary action, knowing they were going to before FATF in October this year? Why did they not pay more attention? And I say pay more attention because I think personally that they just didn't bother about it. The act's passed and let's move on. But unfortunately, there are recorded documents as of October, December 2014 and April 2015, committing Guyana to do the following areas by 2015 and September and May 2015. One of which had to do with setting up the supervisory body. And so it is no wonder, therefore, the recommendation number 4 that is stated in the report on the website that the issue of the supervisory body is still an issue to be addressed, because our act says that we want an AML-CFT authority. If the act had remained as it was originally, there would have been no such requirement, as you already had a mechanism by law to do so. However, they didn't want any participation of ministers, presidents, etc., and I find sometimes now, based on what's happening, all of this rather laughable. So there's been no haste, no indication of, one, the government setting up an AML-CFT authority. There are 2 components there, the ex officios, many of them, and most of them would have been in what was the National Advisory Committee, and the 10 that come from Parliament. And again, we had pointed out, and I remind you, our press conference on June the 24th, 2015, made a point on this, that this whole parliamentary mechanism was fraught with problems. One, of course, was that you had politically exposed persons, that is peeps, who are members of Parliament, selecting and appointing 10 people, who could very well be peeps as well, politically exposed persons, to a supervisory body called an authority to supervise now money laundering, countering, financing of terrorism, and having access to highly confidential information through the regulatory agencies. However, that's in the law, and they made no efforts to implement it. Certainly, knowing that Guyana was going before the FATF, some kind of haste should have been executed by the government in order to show that there were some efforts being made. The second quandary they're going to face is that the Parliamentary Committee on Appointments, by its experience with the rights commissions, and because one has to advertise and consult and come to an agreement in the committee in order to, and in this case by majority only, and in the House, that this process is not a rapid process. This is not one that goes very quickly. There are other issues in the new act that one is uncertain about whether there has been any action, because some of these are what are called administrative, such as customer due diligence, etc. Have they been implementing this? Have the banks and all these other agencies been doing this? The same thing with recommendation number 2, which has to do with ensuring a fully operational and effectively functioning FIU. What in relation to the new act, as well as to do with the requirements of FATF? What is the status of those issues? All these are uncertainties. What now? What now? I'm not particularly interested in this press conference, I said, is not to deal with all the past issues, although it's not, you have to have reference to some kind of institutional memory. But what now? And this is where Guyana, and I think where the focus should come. Whilst the PPP can feel some vindication for the positions it took on June 24, 2015 at its press conference, pointing out the inadequacies of the amendment bill and why Guyana would still not be compliant, we are in the PPP pained by the fact that Guyana remains non-compliant. In a period of economic downturn, the holding up and undue delays in the banking system with regard to foreign transactions has further exacerbated the economic situation for the country and for, in particular, the commercial and private sector. The government needs to bring itself into compliance in time for the February 2016 review of the FATF, or thereabouts. So again, there's a 6-month tranche you go through each time, so we're facing the next 6 months. And to move with haste to seriously address this untenable development. And here are some issues. There are three I wish to suggest on behalf of the PPP. A, move to assign the Parliamentary Committee of Appointments to give urgent priority to select and name the 10 appointees for the AML-CFT Authority. This is not a process that will and can be done swiftly if they move in accordance with the requirements of the Amendment Act 2015. B, in the interim, because as I said, this process will take quite a while, in the interim, re-establish a National Advisory Committee, which does not require parliamentary approval. It is an administrative body, and in the past, it was under the chairmanship of Dr. Roger Luncheon as HPS. But the Attorney General, etc., were all present there. In the interim, re-establish a National Advisory Committee to address the deficiencies pointed out by FATF, improve coordination of the supervisory bodies, and the non-implementation of the May and September 2015 deadlines agreed to in October 2014 and April 2015. C, bring further amendments to the AML-CFT Amendment Act 2015 between now and December 2015 to bring Guyana into compliance with some of the recommendations listed at 1 to 4 in the FATF document, and also wheresoever deficiencies still remain in the legislative and non-legislative measures in the agreed plan of action. In other words, the bill has to be returned to the House with additional amendments or corrections, or as guided by the CFATF, the regional body that has been assisting Guyana on behalf of FATF, and the FATF itself. If the government and others have to eat crow, then so be it. Guyana has to treat with these issues with the seriousness they require so that we can become and be in compliance with and be removed from the list of high-risk, non-cooperative jurisdictions as Ecuador and Sudan were able to do. There is no time to waste. The people and the economy are feeling the squeeze. The government cannot continue to treat this matter the way it did in the Parliamentary Committee and as it has done since it is in government in regards to international regulatory review and sanctions. So the focus today is on we have to move quickly. We have lost 2 years thanks to the APNU, AFC, when we were in the Parliamentary Committee, and regrettably we have lost time again based on, it appears, inattentiveness, dismissiveness, or don't care a damn. We passed the bill, so that's it. That's all we have to do. And so the Attorney General and I hope there won't be many spokespersons, because the focal point on AML-CFT and the focal point that goes before the FATF and who the FATF deals with, CFATF deals with, the focal point is the Attorney General, Minister of Legal Affairs. Just as a small comment, and why I'm being rather assertive in their rather disregard for this whole thing having passed the bill, is that having passed the bill, the government appears to have not informed FATF or CFATF that, one, there was a new government, and two, there was a new focal point. And so the focal point continued, that is Mr. Nandalal, continued to receive information from the CFATF and the review group after the bill was passed. And that's why I say carelessness, disregard, negligence, dismissiveness. You as Presbyterian can find your word. I know what my words are, that you're not taking this seriously, basically. And the country has been punishing now for 2 years, and this will continue again at the next review in February 2016, unless the government, just gets and does what it is required to do in accordance with the law. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions?
Just a quick comment.
Yeah.
Didn't Mr. Nandalal inform them that he was no longer the Attorney General? I remember him.
Yeah, that was done when suddenly correspondence started coming to him, and he did advise them then that, by the way, I'm not the person anymore. There's a new government, and let the government name their focal point. But that was subsequently after the elections, and the reviews come in April, May, June, and so on. So it was after the bill was passed.
What about if you want to reestablish the National Advisory Committee, would the
If I want to advise,
No.
I'm proposing the government do
Yeah.
that.
No, would the proposal be then to have the government head the committee, or would you like the committee headed by a member of Congress?
As an interim measure, the National Advisory Committee has nothing to do with Parliament. It was an administrative measure by the government while the bill was stuck in the House to 2013 and 2014 to address some of the concerns to do with the agreed plan of action and some of the requirements that we had to face. And so the cabinet appointed it as a body. At that point it was headed by the HPS. The new government can put who they want. But it had ministers such as the Attorney General Legal Affairs, Home Affairs, for example, Finance. Finance had to be there because customs and all these other issues, and banking, the Bank of Ghana and so on. And then you had bodies such as the DPP's office, KANU, and then when SOCO was created, then SOCO had a representative, the Serious Organized Crime Unit. The FIU, of course, was there. I can't remember all the body, but it was quite a large body. And we met and went through, as a template, these are the requirements, how far are we? So you kept checking the stage. And in some cases, the coordination between agencies, as I said, the Customs, SOCO, KANU, GRA were kind of tripping over each other at the airport. And so they were able to sit and work on protocols, who does what. So it allows for non-legislative interventions to improve coordination and also oversight, etc. It's a very important body to set up in the interim. It will not do all the powers, it will not have all the powers or the responsibilities as in the Act for the authority, but at least to keep Guyana on track with what it has committed to do and what it needs to do by February. If the government sets up the authority in accordance with the Act, whenever that happens, the National Advisory Committee would dissolve, because basically that responsibility would go to the authority. But something has to be done, because basically there's been nothing for the last, 5 months, 6 months.
If there's no move by the government to bring the amendments you're recommending, will the opposition bring those to the House?
Well, we'll have to be clearer on what are some of the specifics. I mean, what we have got is what we read on the website. But obviously the devil is in the detail in terms of what specifically. For example, when we amended the amendments we brought in 2014 to define what was called beneficial ownership, this was specifically defined by FATF, and we had to include that in the amendment bill. Bearer bonds and the definition of financial declarations at the airport. In the beginning, we kind of innocently, some of us thought it just meant saying you didn't have 10,000 US on you, and you found in the definition from FATF, which had to be included in the Act, that it included jewelry, checks, managers' checks, any other foreign currency, any other type of currency, jewelry, and so on. So these were all things that were required. So it's the detail, what now left over, because when one looks at the earlier requirements, there are some that obviously in the list of 4, there are some that there were 6 or 7 in October 2014. Those were reduced in April 2015, and now they have reduced to 4. So that bypassing the Act, a number of what were the 68% requirement were dealt with, but we also caused some complications for ourselves by adding in some things that may or may not have been compliant. For example, the FIU. And the requirements of the FIU director, deputy director, the lawyer, the accountant, all to be appointed by Parliament. You know, again, the principle of PEEPs, politically exposed persons, appointing people who are supervisory and who are to be uncontaminated by the process, but to be able to oversight and to be able to do what's required in the law. So I sincerely hope that the government, and that's why I'm saying that the government has to have full disclosure. It's got to be able to, one, say this is what we didn't do, this is what we need to do, this is what we're going to do to bring Guyana as rapidly as possible into compliance. And certainly they need to convene a parliamentary committee. If they're going to, in the Parliamentary Committee of Appointments, then Dr. Norton has to be advised to call a meeting, and he has to be directed whether what is being given priority, because the Committee of Appointment has the Rights Commissions. It has been given responsibility by the Local Government Commission to appoint a member on the Local Government Commission. No action's been taken on that either. There's another one, I'm now forgetting. This one, the anti-money laundering. So someone, the cabinet has to say, you know, which is priority. I know there's everyone vying for priority. ERC, Women and Gender, IPC, all of these have expired and are continuing administratively. But at some point, these issues have to be addressed. So the government needs to also advise, and certainly in terms of what I think you're trying to get at, Pushpa, is that it would do no harm to the government were it to invite members of the opposition, particularly those of us who were familiar with this long process we've gone through, to sit down and say, hey, listen, there's some areas we have to now come back into Parliament, it looks like with some new regs or more amendments, and that you know, this is what we have to do. We're looking for your cooperation or support for this. I think that these are issues that are not difficult to address. You know, but they've got to lead, and if they don't wish to lead, then Guyana will continue and govern instead of running around making accusations all the time. But this is a very sad issue, and I think obviously I haven't heard some of the other persons outside of government who very authoritatively said that with the passage of the bill, Guyana would be compliant. I haven't heard them say a word either. There's just silence. And as I said, I think that for me, governments have to eat crow every now and again. Eat it. Get on with it. Let this country not punish anymore. This issue is extraordinarily difficult for us. And the embarrassment for me as a Guyanese in particular is if Sudan can do it, wow, what happened to us? You know, I mean, seriously. And I'm not putting down Sudanese or Sudan. It's just a country that's had a torturous history, a civil war, and has very limited resources. If they can meet the FATF requirements, what happened to us? You know. So those are the issues I wanted to address. Let me open the floor to questions, and any other questions, any concerns.
Just clarification.
Yeah.
The opposition is willing to work with the government. I know you mentioned earlier, as long as they approach you guys, you're looking for that approach, you're willing to.
Well, we have to know that they're serious in the first place. If they're silent on it, one can't. But certainly by this press conference, we're indicating to them that, look, there are matters that have to be addressed urgently. And obviously, if they bring the matters to Parliament, they have to deal with the opposition. Now, they could feel that they have the majority, can do what they want. Yeah. They face that consequence already in that the AML-CFT bill was rushed through. They know some of the concerns of the then government. They knew it. It's all, we went through this 100 times in the committee and totally dismissed those
But
issues.
there's no way the opposition, period, even though they're silent, no way the opposition is going to go, you know, say, well, look, this is where you're at, you know.
But this is what I'm doing. It's not what I'm doing.
In a formal way.
Well, this is quite public. The public way, obviously. The issue of whether we meet and talk on a number of issues in the corridors from time to time, yes. But until the issue is not just talk right now. There's been a lot of talk. And one of the talk was that we were compliant, and we aren't. So let's get on with it now. Let's get and set up the authority. And therefore, one of the supervisory issues, one of the recommendations will be somewhat addressed. But you can't sit from July 10th, from the assent of the bill by the President, regardless of whether you talk to the opposition or not. The issue was the AML-CFT authority should have been appointed sometime between July 10th and October 23rd when you went before FATF. You know? We have made it very clear, as you may have heard, sir, in the Parliament, that matters of national interest for Guyana, we will cooperate with the government. Yeah, we may not always agree. We are not puppies and we're not lapdogs. But we recognize that what are national issues that we will be prepared to cooperate to find solutions. But as I said, we may not always agree on the tactics or the strategy. And so we have already demonstrated that on a number of issues.
Given that you do still have some, you do have these recommendations and you have further amendment recommendations that you would have to formalize, are you, I'm just a little bit, I guess a little bit confused if you would lend support to get the 2/3 majority for the authority.
No, it doesn't require 2/3.
The authority doesn't
No.
require 2/3?
No, only the rights commissions. No, the authority is a simple majority. And in the committee, it's by majority only. So, and they have the chairmanship and the majority in the committee. We don't. So remember, we're four. The opposition has 4 in the parliamentary committees. The government has 5.
Yeah, I'm confusing myself.
Yeah. No, you're confusing Pushpa with the rights commissions. And the PPC, the Public Procurement Commission, which is 2/3.
For some reason I thought the
No,
authority
it's
was
simple
2/3.
majority. I have the act here. You could check afterwards. Yeah, simple majority. That amendment would never have come if they didn't have a majority. This would never have been an innovation, I can assure you that. So that's my concern, is that the lack of haste, the lack of what appears to be attention. These are administrative issues. You pass your act, then now you got to implement it. That's what it's about, not just having it signed. So these are issues we can't do anything about except to say that, it has to be done. And certainly as an opposition, as I said, if the government brings further amendments or is required to bring further amendments, we're prepared to cooperate in the committee.
So, Mr.
We're not going to block, as we've said and Dr. Jagdeo said in the Parliament, we're not going to block things just for the sake of blocking them and obstruct just for the sake of obstructing. And you saw that in the budget debate. We fought on issues in the budget debate, both on the constitutional legal issues before the debate commenced, and also the issue of the order in which the leading opposition spoke and the 3 days. But nevertheless, we fought, we argued, we made our case, but we also did not block the budgetary requirements. We didn't vote against them. We didn't do a number of things that would have caused some problems.
Just from
I'm not saying we never will. We haven't done so far.
so basically it means nothing. It means nothing that the act is passed and the implementation. I mean, in a nutshell, the implementation. is
Any piece of legislation, it's on the paper. It's now law. But those who are in charge of the law, whose portfolio it falls under, are required to now implement it. So, for example, areas of the money laundering, as I said, the authority, issues to do with the banks, and there were a number of other laws that were also amended: gaming, insurance, security councils, cooperative societies. All of those now have to take that law and say, okay, now what forms do we have to change? What mechanisms internally, that when someone comes to register a cooperative society, in terms of what the law says we got to do, how do we now implement that? So when people come, it's that's required. Otherwise, it stays in the law, and this is where the issue of training staff. You had to now train agencies to say, look, this part of the law relates to you, and this is now when a clerk comes, or someone comes to the banking at the counter, these are now issues you have to do, and these are directives that have to be given by those who head these bodies, whether the Bank of Guyana, whether the commercial banks, whether insurance companies, etc., cooperative societies, Security Council. It's that putting now the life into the law. The law had a torturous life, but now it's putting the law into effect. And so that is just as challenging as actually making the law, because it's a lot of training, coordinating, familiarizing, and also public education. And that has also been absent, in the sense that people have heard us talk a lot about the money laundering bill, but it's when people go to the bank and want to say buy foreign currency because they have a shop and they're importing stuff, or they're importing cars, or even the rice millers or whatever. They then are then given this documents and stuff they have to fill out and so on. But no one has said to them publicly, look, there are going to be some difficulties, some delays. So if you want to buy cars or whatever, you've got to do it now 5 months in advance. You can't expect to do it in a matter of days or weeks or whatever. So people are complaining that they've applied and they're waiting 5 months for the process to go through. Because remember, the banks here have to carry out certain checks and due diligence here, and then at the other end, there are the similar checks at those banks overseas or agencies overseas. And so it makes delays and slowing down in the process. And I remember the former chairman of the Private Sector Commission, Mr. Webster, making a very impassioned television program about what the FATF, putting us on the grey list, would do to us. And this was before, I think it was before June 2014, before that. So the implementation of the law now is taking the relevant sections and what applies to different agencies, or what a coordination between agencies. And that's where FIU and the Ministry of Legal Affairs sits on top of it and helps. But if you have the authority, it could do it. But the interim committee, the interim body we set up, the National Advisory Committee, was able to provide that. So we were able to get training. I think, I don't want to call the government because the government's name, or which government's name, as I may have it wrong in my memory now, who helped with the training of the serious organized crime unit staff, investigators. There was training of persons to do with going overseas to do training on freezing of assets and stuff like that, because that's a very important part of the FATF. And of course, you know, this new bill they're bringing, Financial Institutions Amendment Act, is not really related to the FATF, but it's going to be controversial, you know. But in the money laundering law, the issue of scrutiny of bank accounts and credit bureau and all these things are provided for. So I would hope that that you find the missing Attorney General, the mystic Attorney General. Ah, very good, very good, very good. So I hope it's on FATF. Is it?
We're not sure what the subject is as yet.
Well, I know some of you sitting here will not lose the opportunity if I know you well. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope it's been helpful. Okay. Have a good day.
Mr. Chair, I just have a couple of clarifications about the same thing. Was that ever being touted? Because I remember about having opposition